I spent months preparing that gift, pouring into it every memory, every moment I thought still meant something. The night I gave it to him, he barely glanced at it, then threw it straight into the trash. But I didn't flinch. Because what he didn't know was that inside that box wasn't just a gift. It was the one thing that would ruin him, and I'd been waiting for this moment all along. My name is Emily Carter, and I thought I understood the man I married until the night he threw everything away with a single careless gesture. It was our 12th wedding anniversary, a quiet autumn evening in Denver. The kind of evening I used to believe mattered. I had planned the dinner myself, his favorite steak, a bottle of Malbec we'd once shared on our honeymoon, soft jazz humming in the background. The finishing touch was the gift, something I'd been working on for weeks. A handcrafted wooden box I designed myself. I'd spent hours after work carving, sanding, staining it. Inside were mementos from every stage of our life together, concert tickets from our first date, a napkin with his ridiculous doodle from the coffee shop where we first said, "I love you," pressed wildflowers from a mountain hike, a small key to the first apartment we rented in downtown Denver, and a letter, a handwritten letter pouring out everything I felt but rarely said aloud. When I slid the box across the table toward Nathan, my heart raced, not with fear, but with hope. I wanted him to see me again, to see us. He didn't even pretend. Nathan picked up the box, turned it in his hands once, and scoffed. "What is this?" His tone was flat, almost bored. He flicked open the lid, glanced at the contents for barely a second, then shut it with a snap. "You made this?" he asked, eyebrow raised. I nodded, swallowing back the lump rising in my throat. I thought it would mean something. It's us. Our memories. Everything we've built together. He snorted under his breath. "Built?" Nathan leaned back in his chair, shaking his head with that same smirk I'd seen 100 times, the one that made me feel small without him ever needing to raise his voice. "This is the best you could come up with?" He tossed the box onto the table with a dull thud. 12 years, Emily, and you bring me a box of junk." My chest tightened, but I kept my eyes on his. "It's not junk. I wanted to remind us." "Of what?" He cut me off, waving a hand dismissively. "Your little scrapbook projects? Your sentimental nonsense? God, Emily, do you ever stop being so exhausting?" His words hit harder than any scream would have. I forced my voice to stay even. "I just thought maybe, after everything, you'd want to remember how far we've come." Nathan stood abruptly, chair scraping against the hardwood. He walked over to the trash can, lifted the lid, and without a word, dropped the box inside. The sound of the lid slamming shut echoed in the silent kitchen. He turned back to me, eyes sharp. "Grow up, Emily." I felt something inside me crack. Not break, not shatter, crack. Like a thin sheet of ice finally giving way. I stared at him, memorizing the way his mouth twisted with contempt. The way he crossed his arms, leaning slightly on one leg like he was bored with the entire conversation. And for the first time in 12 years, I stopped asking myself what I had done wrong, because in that moment, I knew. It wasn't me. It had never been me. It was Nathan. And I was done. But I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't even going to storm out. I was going to let him believe this was just another argument. Another disappointment he could toss aside like everything else. And soon, he'd find out what I'd really put inside that box. Nathan didn't give me the courtesy of a pause before revealing just how little I meant to him. As he leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed like a man settling in to deliver bad news to a stranger, he let out a sigh. The kind of sigh you make when you're bored, not when you're about to destroy a marriage. "This isn't working anymore," he said casually, as if discussing a bad business deal. I blinked. "What?" Nathan shrugged. "You? Us? This marriage? I'm done. Emily, it's over." I stared at him, searching his face for something, remorse, hesitation, even anger. But there was nothing. His expression was blank, almost irritated. "You're done," I repeated quietly. "Yeah," he said, pushing off the counter. "I've met someone else. Her name's Kayla. She's 25, fresh out of grad school. Works at the firm. Vibrant, exciting. The kind of woman who actually knows how to live life, not just exist in it." His words hit like a slap across the face. Kayla. I'd heard her name before, offhand mentions in stories Nathan told about work, little comments, light chuckles. Always harmless. I thought, I should have known better. I swallowed hard. "So you're leaving me? For her?" He gave a sharp, humorless laugh. "Don't make it sound so dramatic. This has been coming for a while. You're too clingy. Emily. Too emotional. I need someone who adds something real to my life, not drags me down with all this sentimental crap." I felt a strange calm settle over me, like my heart had decided to stop trying to race ahead of the inevitable. For years, I'd believed I was the problem, that if I just worked harder, loved better, gave more, Nathan would finally see me, finally value me. But here he stood, proving me wrong in every way that mattered. I met his gaze evenly. "And this is how you tell me? On our anniversary?" Nathan shrugged, unapologetic. "No time like the present." I nodded slowly, feeling a curious sense of clarity wash over me. "I see," I said softly. His smirk deepened, mistaking my quiet for surrender. And maybe once, it would have been. But not tonight. Not ever again. I stood up, folding my hands neatly in front of me. "Well, thank you for finally being honest." Nathan chuckled under his breath. "Wow, I expected more fireworks. Guess you're finally learning to stop being so damn dramatic." I tilted my head, studying him. The man I'd poured my heart, time, and energy into. The man who had taken, and never once thought I'd be the one to walk away. I gave him a small smile, the kind that hides sharp edges. "Oh, don't worry," I said softly. "The fireworks are coming." And with that, I turned and walked upstairs. Nathan didn't follow. Of course he didn't. He thought he'd won. As I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, my mind wasn't swirling with heartbreak. It was busy rewinding, back through the years of small humiliations and quiet sacrifices. I remembered the day Nathan's investment firm nearly collapsed, how he came home pale, reeking of fear, and told me the bank had pulled their funding. How he claimed it was just a rough patch and promised to fix it, though I knew from the tremor in his hands that he had no idea how. What Nathan didn't know, what he'd never cared enough to ask, was that I had money. Real money. 6 years ago, before Nathan's firm even existed, I'd been a founding partner at Aria Concepts, a Denver-based branding agency. I'd built that company from the ground up with 2 friends from college, pouring every ounce of creativity and energy I had into it. And when a national conglomerate bought us out, my shares cashed in for 7 figures. I walked away quietly after the acquisition. Burnt out, tired, wanting to start something smaller. Nathan had been thrilled. He called it cute that I was taking a break. And I let him believe I'd just walked away with a small payout. I let him believe it because I thought that's what a supportive wife did. When he begged me for a loan to save his firm, when he framed it as a temporary bridge, I wired him $500,000, no questions asked. And because he was in such a hurry, I had him sign a simple contract, one I drafted myself. A transfer of controlling interest in Carter & Co., his company, in exchange for my investment, with the clause that if he ever defaulted or tried to push me out, ownership would automatically revert fully to me. He signed it without reading. I still remembered the ink smudge on his thumb. I'd filed the papers with my lawyer, Sophia Mitchell, who'd looked at me and said, "You know this gives you the power to take everything, right?" At the time, I'd laughed. "I'll never use it. He's my husband." How naive I'd been. I reached our bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dresser drawer where I kept my personal files. It wasn't just the contract tucked in there. 3 years ago, I'd used part of my payout from Aria Concepts to buy a small mountain property in Aspen. A quiet, two-bedroom retreat I planned to renovate for weekend getaways. Nathan never even knew it existed. I bought it under Everest Creek Holdings, a shell company I set up with Sophia's help. It was supposed to be a surprise, a place for us. Now, it was my escape. I opened the drawer, pulled out the contract, the property deed, and my emergency fund checkbook. I didn't feel like a betrayed wife packing for a tearful exit. I felt like a woman finally waking up from a very long, very bad dream. As I slipped the documents into my travel bag, I realized something simple, brutal, and liberating. Nathan had spent years thinking I was his safety net, but I'd been holding the scissors all along. By the time the sun broke over the Denver skyline the next morning, I was already gone. I left our house before Nathan even stirred, slipping quietly into the soft gray light of dawn with nothing but a suitcase, a leather folder of documents, and a plan I hadn't allowed myself to admit until now. The first call I made was to Sophia Mitchell. She picked up on the second ring, her voice calm, clipped, and instantly awake. "I'm activating the transfer clause," I said simply. A pause. Then, "Understood. I'll prepare the filings and notify the board." Sophia had been waiting for this moment longer than I had. We agreed to meet at her office by noon. The next call was to a property management firm in Aspen. I arranged to have the house stocked with essentials, groceries, fresh linens, security system reactivated. I'd be there by nightfall. Finally, I sent a text to Nathan. "Taking some time for myself. Don't wait up." I smiled as I pressed send. Let him think I was licking my wounds. Let him believe this was just another one of my emotional phases he could ignore until it blew over. By the time he realized what I'd set in motion, it would be far too late. At noon sharp, I stepped into Sophia's office, a sleek, glass-walled suite in downtown Denver, far removed from the chaos I'd left behind. She was waiting with two thick folders and a satisfied smirk. "Everything's in place," she said, sliding one folder across the table. "Your ownership transfer will hit the registry by end of business today. As of tomorrow, you're the majority shareholder of Carter & Co." I ran my fingers over the cover. "Does he have any legal grounds to fight this?" Sophia shook her head. "Not a chance. The contract is airtight, and with his extracurricular activities, let's just say the board won't be rushing to defend him." I allowed myself a slow breath. Good. The next move was mine. Before I left, Sophia added, "I have the press release drafted if you want to go public." I gave her a thin smile. "Not yet. I want him to hear it from me first." By late afternoon, I was on the road to Aspen, the mountain air growing crisper as the city fell away behind me. I reached the house just before dusk. It stood like a quiet promise against the backdrop of pine trees and snow-capped peaks. My house, my future, inside. I unpacked carefully. Documents in the safe, checkbook on the desk. And the contract, my silent weapon, set on the mantelpiece where I could see it every morning. That night, as I stood on the balcony with a glass of wine, watching the stars blink into view, I felt something settle in my chest. This wasn't escape, it was preparation. Nathan had just thrown away the woman who'd built his safety net. And tomorrow, I'd show him exactly what that mistake would cost. 3 days later, Nathan received an email marked, "Urgent, board meeting, mandatory attendance." The subject line alone was enough to make him sweat. But what waited inside would hit harder than any blindside he'd ever pulled on me. The meeting was held in the sleek glass conference room of Carter & Co., a space Nathan used to strut through like he owned the world. That morning, he walked in, expecting a routine agenda or maybe a minor investor update. Instead, he walked into a room already half filled with board members. Sophia seated at the head of the table, my proxy in this opening act. Nathan's eyes narrowed the moment he saw her. "Sophia? What are you?" Before he could finish, I stepped through the door. I'd chosen a navy suit, sharp heels, No jewelry except for the slim gold bracelet I'd bought with my first paycheck from Aria Concepts. I stood tall, calm, every move measured. Nathan's face went through a carousel of emotions, confusion, irritation, and then something I hadn't seen in him for years. Doubt. "Emily," he said, forcing a thin smile. "What's this?" I placed a slim leather folder on the table. "Effective immediately," I began, my voice clear. "I am exercising my controlling interest in Carter & Co., per the contract you signed 6 years ago." A silence rippled through the room. Nathan's smile froze. "You're what?" I slid the contract across the table toward him, letting his name in bold lettering stare back at him. 51%, I said evenly. "I'm now the majority shareholder. As per the terms, you are hereby removed as Chief Executive Officer, pending full review by the board." One of the board members, Patrick Reynolds, a man who'd smiled too easily at Nathan's jokes, leaned forward. "Is this legitimate?" Sophia gave a single nod. "Fully executed, legally binding, and filed with the state this morning." Nathan snatched up the document, his eyes scanning furiously. "This is a joke." He looked up, desperation starting to slip into his voice. "You can't do this." I met his gaze steadily. "I can." And I just did. He stood abruptly, hands planted on the table. "I built this company." I smiled, not cruelly, not coldly, just knowingly. "With my money, with my silent support, while you strutted around thinking I was nothing but a background player." I leaned forward, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "You threw me away, Nathan. You didn't realize I was the foundation you built everything on." The board watched in stunned silence as Nathan's jaw clenched, his face draining of color. "Consider this your formal removal," I finished. "Your office will be cleared by end of day. Security will escort you out if necessary." For once, Nathan had no clever comeback. I straightened, smoothed the edge of my jacket, and turned to the board. "I'll be assuming interim leadership effective immediately. Further actions will be communicated through proper channels." With that, I gathered my folder and walked out, leaving Nathan standing there, stripped of his power, drowning in a mess of his own making. The first blow had landed, and I was just getting started. Nathan's reaction was exactly what I expected: desperate, frantic, and utterly unprepared. Within hours of the board meeting, his phone blew up with calls from lawyers, disgruntled investors, and even a few close colleagues who suddenly questioned his leadership. But the biggest blow was yet to come. Sophia and I had spent weeks gathering evidence of Nathan's reckless dealings, unauthorized client promises, questionable personal expenses charged to the company, and most damning of all, a series of back-channel communications with a competitor that bordered on corporate espionage. When the press caught wind of the board's decision, we didn't hesitate. The next morning, a carefully crafted statement appeared on every major business news outlet. Carter & Co. announces leadership change following discovery of significant ethical breaches and financial mismanagement under former CEO Nathan Carter. The company pledges full cooperation with ongoing investigations and commits to restoring stakeholder trust under new interim leadership. Nathan's carefully cultivated image unraveled in real time. Clients who once lined up to work with him began reconsidering their contracts. The company's stock, already shaky from rumors, plummeted, and internally. Morale shifted as employees whispered about the scandal that had been hidden in plain sight. Nathan, for all his bravado, was losing ground fast. His phone calls to me were relentless at first. Pleas for meetings, promises to make things right, threats to expose the truth. I didn't return a single one. Instead, I focused on steering Carter & Co. through the storm. Working closely with the board and legal team, I launched internal audits, reassessed client relationships, and began rebuilding the fractured trust. It wasn't easy. I faced skepticism, resistance, and old biases that doubted a woman could lead a firm like Carter & Co. But every challenge only fueled my determination. And through it all, I kept one eye on Nathan, watching as the man who had once dismissed me as emotional baggage floundered under the weight of his own mistakes. One evening, as I stayed late at the office, reviewing financial reports, my phone buzzed. A message from Nathan. Kayla left. She called me weak and said I threw away everything I had, including you. I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The same man who had called my efforts pointless was now tasting his own medicine, but I wasn't about to gloat. Instead, I closed my laptop, took a deep breath, and reminded myself why I'd fought so hard. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life. And this time, I was in control. Nathan showed up at the Aspen house 3 weeks after his fall from grace, engine still running, tires crunching over the gravel like a last-ditch drum roll. I watched him from the porch, mug of coffee warming my palms against the late spring chill. He'd driven nearly 4 hours in the dark to meet me at dawn. Desperation had no respect for sleep. He stumbled out of the car, hair disheveled, suit jacket wrinkled and mismatched with hiking boots, an outfit assembled in panic. When our eyes met, the confidence he'd always worn like expensive cologne flickered out. "Emily," he called, voice rough, pleading. "Please. We need to talk." I didn't move. "You made this drive because your lawyers finally told you the criminal investigation is real." His shoulders sagged. "They said you're pressing forward, that I might lose everything." "That part's accurate." I sipped my coffee. "But you lost the important things weeks ago." He crossed the distance between us, stopping at the bottom step as if the 3 wooden risers were a mountain. "Kayla's gone," he blurted. "The firm is in free fall. Reporters camp outside my condo. I can't breathe." "You could start by accepting responsibility." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Responsibility? I wouldn't be in this position if you hadn't." He cut himself off, realizing blame wouldn't work here. "Look, I know I messed up. I'm sorry." The apology felt like an awkward costume he hadn't learned to wear. Still, I gestured for him to follow me inside. He exhaled with relief. The living room smelled of cedar and fresh paint. Morning light spilled across unfinished canvases propped against one wall. Nathan glanced at them as though surprised to discover I had a life that didn't orbit him. On the coffee table lay the same handcrafted wooden box he'd tossed away, the lid now polished, hinges gleaming. He stared, throat bobbing. "You kept it?" he whispered. "I salvaged what mattered," I replied. "Open it." He hesitated, then lifted the lid. Where once there had been love notes and ticket stubs, now rested 2 crisp documents and a silver pen. One was a full transfer of his remaining 49% equity and voting rights in Carter & Co. to me. The other was a non-prosecution agreement, my promise to withdraw civil damages and recommend leniency to investigators, conditional on his complete cooperation and restitution to harmed clients. He read in silence, jaw tightening with every clause. Finally, he looked up, eyes rimmed red. "You're forcing me to sign away everything." "I'm offering you a path out of ruin," I corrected. "Sign both, step out of the spotlight, rebuild your life quietly. Refuse, and you'll spend the next decade in courtrooms." He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to beg, but nothing emerged. Pride, fear, grief tangled inside him until only a wheeze escaped. "Nathan," I said, keeping my tone even, "I did not create your downfall. You did, the moment you decided loyalty was disposable." He ran a trembling hand through his hair. "I never thought you'd do this." "Because you never thought I could." Silence stretched. Outside, a blue jay called from the pines. Time wasn't stopping for his epiphany. At last he sank onto the sofa, picked up the pen, and signed where Sophia's colored flags indicated. First, the equity transfer. Then, the settlement. His signature looked smaller than I remembered, shrunken, uncertain. When it was done, he set the pen down carefully, as though any sudden move might shatter what little dignity he had left. "So that's it?" he asked. I closed the box, locking the papers inside. "That's it. You'll receive confirmation when filings are complete. After that, we have nothing left to discuss." He rose, eyes glistening. "I threw away a wife," he murmured, voice cracking. I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "And I just threw away a fraud." He flinched, but nodded. Wordlessly, he walked to the door, each step heavier than the last. At the threshold he paused, perhaps expecting me to say something, one final olive branch, a shred of the woman who once bent to fit his shadows. I offered only silence. Nathan stepped into the morning light, shoulders hunched, and made the lonely walk back to his car. The engine turned over, gravel crunched again, and the sound faded down the mountain road until all that remained was the hush of wind through evergreens. I stood there a long moment, letting calm settle into my bones. The documents were signed, the past was severed, and the future, whatever shape it took, belonged entirely to me. The door clicked shut behind Nathan, and the sound rolled through the house like a closing chapter. I sank onto the sofa, letting the hush settle over me, no ticking clock of his expectations, no humming anxiety beneath my ribs. Just the cedar-scented air, the mountains beyond the windows, and the steady drum of my own heartbeat. For a while I sat there, absorbing the finality of what had happened. The contract was secure in the wooden box. Nathan's signature. Once a symbol of swagger, now bound him to silence and restitution. The company he'd paraded like a trophy was mine to reshape or dismantle on my terms. He could no longer rewrite the narrative. The pen was in my hand. I rose and drifted to the studio corner, where half-finished canvases leaned against the wall. Slashes of cobalt and vermilion caught the early light. Painting had always felt like oxygen, but somewhere along the road I'd learned to ration it, afraid my passions would seem childish next to his high-powered deals. Now the colors looked brighter than I remembered, as if they, too, had been waiting for permission to breathe. I selected a brush, dipped it in a swirl of paint, and let the bristles sweep across the nearest canvas. The first stroke quivered, uncertain, exhilarating, then another and another. I wasn't trying to capture a view or please a client. I was simply marking this moment in pigment and motion, proving to myself that creation could still feel like joy. Outside, the morning sun crested the ridge, glazing the peaks in rose gold. I carried the canvas to the deck and propped it on the railing, letting the wind lift the scent of pine and wet earth. Somewhere below, the faint growl of an engine faded toward the valley, Nathan's final retreat. The mountains answered with silence, solid and indifferent. They had seen victories and defeats far older than mine, and their calm steadied me. I thought back to the girl I'd been when I sold my shares at Aria Concepts, hopeful, fearless, convinced that love meant standing quietly in someone else's spotlight. How many rooms had I made smaller so Nathan could feel larger? How many dreams had I folded away like fragile linen, promising myself I'd return when the timing was right? The tally no longer mattered. Those debts were paid in full. A gust lifted my hair as I turned to face the open horizon. I imagined the boardroom murmurs echoing downtown, the investors recalculating, the headlines spinning. None of it reached me here. And that distance felt like power, not the bludgeoning kind Nathan chased, but the quiet authority that grows when you finally claim your own space. I set the painting aside to dry and poured a fresh cup of coffee. Steam curled into the cool air, carrying the faint bitterness I loved. From the deck, the forest stretched in layered shades of green, each tree distinct and alive, yet part of one vast living tapestry. I realized that was what I wanted for Carter & Co. No more glossy facades or hollow pitches, but genuine work that left the world brighter than it found it. Whether I rebuilt the firm or shuttered its doors, the decision would arise from purpose, not revenge. Still, the satisfaction ran deep. Nathan had tossed away a gift, certain it was worthless, and in doing so had sealed his own fate. He would remember that lesson every time he saw an empty board seat, every time a reporter asked for comment, every time he reached for a door that no longer opened beneath his hand. And I I would remember the sound of that wooden box dropping into the trash, because it marked the second my freedom began. I set my mug on the railing and closed my eyes, letting the sunlight warm the lids. Not escape, I reminded myself. Preparation. Today I would call Sophia, finalize the filings, notify the employees, assure the clients. Tomorrow I would paint again. And the day after that, perhaps I'd hike the ridge, just to see how far the valley stretched. But for this single breath of time, I allowed myself to feel only the clean, sharp thrill of victory. No epilogue, no after-story, no what-ifs. Just the crisp mountain air filling my lungs and the steady beat of a heart finally marching to its own rhythm.